emodels.co.uk. Make something awesome. And then go back in with the wolf grey and... Hey everyone, it's Fox from Model Making Guru here. Hello. Welcome to part 3 of our build of the Takom 135th Panhard AML-90 light reconnaissance vehicle. Well, light armoured vehicle, let's get it correct. With a little bit of Warhammer thrown in, which I am calling the Imperial Skitter, a light reconnaissance vehicle, hence my hiccup. Hello, 4emodels.co.uk. Now, hello, welcome. Yes, if you remember in the last episode, we got the major assembly of the sub-assemblies done for the vehicle. I've not done the figures yet, apart from the 2 that went in there. We're going to do those later. We're going to get the vehicle done and painted and weathered first, or at least painted. What we're going to be doing today is starting the painty. Yes! All the sub-assemblies are done. These still need to be put together at the end, but for now, we've got the lower hull and the big dozer blade and all the bits and bobs. We've got the turret and the lower turret part, and we've got wheels as well, the wheel hubs. Now, what we're going to be doing is getting colours on this. We'll see how much we can do today. We might be able to start the weathering, it depends. I'll see how long this episode goes for, but at the very least, we're going to start getting the colours on. So, what's the first step? Now, I have to tell you, coming off the back of building the Stormwolf and all my gunpla and things like that, this is the entire thing I need to paint on one small piece of foam. I cannot tell you how happy this makes me to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things to paint. It's brilliant. When I'm like in a gunpla, I've got like 4 of these pieces of foam, but like, you know, A4 size, and I've got them lying around with hundreds of things on sticks, and there's millions of parts. It's a nightmare. For this is my entire thing to be painting today. I couldn't tell you how happy I am. It's brilliant. I can go and paint it in half an hour. Brilliant. So, what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to do is apply a coat of primer. Now, remember I said I was doing this video for absolute beginners. What is primer and why do you need it? Well, you could just go ahead and paint all over this with the normal paints. Nothing wrong with that. You just need to be aware that paint doesn't grip that well to bare plastic. Bare plastic is a smooth, soft, well, a smooth, shiny, non-porous surface. Acrylic paints especially don't really grip to plastic that well. They're not brilliant at it. They might, you know, you might be able to paint the whole thing and handle it and make it and everything else, and it might work out. But you will find most likely that as you're handling it, paint starts to either flake off or rub off or just rub away. The whole point of a primer is that this is something that can bond to the plastic and then gives the paint something to grip to. Now this is the ultimate primer. It's the black one, the matte black. Now I'm going to be using this. You can get rattle can primers as well, and they're brilliant. My favourite is the Tamiya rattle can primers. They are by far the absolute best. But what we're going to do today is we're going to use the airbrush primer. Now I've always used rattle cans until I got some of this, because I tried primers and airbrushes before and it sucked. I got some of this. This is the bee's knees ultimate primer. You get it from eModels. Now, the reason I love this stuff is you can spray it on, you can get your airbrush and you can go blah blah blah, I'm not paying attention, I'm watching Coronation Street or something, like, you know, the Bill or something, la 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 la, I'm having my tea, la la la, and you can do that, not pay attention, slap it on, thank you Ted, and it will still come out gorgeous, because this stuff self-levels like a devil. It just flattens itself out. It's beautiful. You can put on too much and it will flatten out and it won't obscure all the details and fine things. This stuff is fantastic. So get yourself some. They do the black, they do various colours. They do a gloss black as well, which is brilliant for metallic things if you want shiny metallics and chrome effects. So we're going to be using that. And the reason we're using the primers in one of various ways bond to the plastic more than paint does. So the primer goes over the plastic, bonds to the plastic, gives a good grip, and then the paint has something to adhere to because it's got a microscopically rough surface that the paint can latch onto and stay on. So if you prime it and then you paint it, you have a much better chance of, throughout the building process as you're handling things, the paint's not going to come off. And more importantly, if you have to do any masking, then without a primer, you might find when you put your masking tape up, the paint goes with it. With a primer, it's less likely to do that. It might still do it occasionally if you're rough, you know, handle it a bit roughly, but you're less likely to have paint coming off when you take masking tape off. So the golden rule when you're making a model kit and you're just starting out, always, 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 always prime your model. Now some people do just put down a layer of paint as a base coat, like they might say, I'll just paint it with some Tamiya flat black. There you go, it's got flat black base on it. It's not a primer. It's not going to grip to the paint, to the plastic, any better than all the other paints you'll put on. So always make sure you use a primer on your kit. It just means the paint's got something to grip to. So we're going to cover it in this, get it all blacked. Then what we're going to do is go in with our two colours. Now I have decided on a colour scheme. If you look at the Hydra kit from Games Workshop, the Warhammer Hydra kit, on the back there's a Wyvern, the alternative build, and it's this beautiful light blue and medium blue colour scheme with some red and white stripes, and it looks very World War II French. I like it. It's a really nice colour, and the guys kind of echo it in their armour, and I really like this, and it's better than just green or desert tan or something, so I'm going to do that. So I've got two colours. I have Vallejo Game Colour Steel Grey 72102, and we have Vallejo Game Colour 72047 Wolf Grey. A lot of the Game Colour colours are supposed to be stand-ins for the Games Workshop colours, the Citadel colours. They're not all exactly the same, and it's not got every colour, but they're supposed to be like reasonable facsimiles, so you can use these instead of the Citadel colours, which is why I'm using the game colour colours. So now I have tweaked these a little bit. I've added a little tiny bit of blue to the Wolf Grey, just to blue it a little bit, and I've added a little bit of the Wolf Grey to the Steel Grey, which is actually a blue, go figure, to make it a bit bluer. I can't remember exactly what colours I used. In the blue I added some electric blue, and I also added, I think, some night blue. Electric blue is 72023 and night blue is 72019. I think those are the colours I added. I only added a handful of drops to this because it was this kind of colour, but it just didn't have that kind of enough blue. I wanted it to be kind of blue tack coloured, a little bit darker. It was a little bit too light, so I added some of those, and this was just a little bit too white with not enough blue tint to it, so I added just a couple of bits of this. Now I've never used game colour before. I've used it like a little bit of brush painting, but I've never airbrushed it, and it is quite thick. So I'm going to be thinning this down. For thinning, I'm going to be using my good old trusty Ultimate Airbrush Thinner. Before you ask me about specific thinning ratios, no idea. I'm going to make it up as I go along because I've never used these before. The golden rule of thinning. You'll get people that harp on about this percentage of thinner to that percentage of paint and this and that. Just don't think about it that deeply. Don't get yourself tied in knots about percentages and measuring out paint. You want your paint to be the thickness of skimmed milk, thereabouts. That's kind of what you're looking for your airbrush. So that's what you want, skimmed milk. Don't worry about percentage of this and percentage of that. The ultimate primer, I'm going to spray neat. This stuff, if you have an airbrush of 0.35 or more, maybe even 0.3, it will spray through fine. To spray this, I'm going to use my 0.5mm Iwata Revolution. And then for the paints, I'm going to use my 0.35mm nozzle Neo for Iwata, my trigger action brush, just because I can't use a normal button airbrush for very long, it hurts my fingers. So this is a button airbrush, this one, the Revolution. This will go through fine. I don't need to thin it down at all. Ideally, you don't want to thin your primers. If you're spraying this through a Neo, or say a 0.35 nozzle or 0.4, you might want to put the pressure up. I tend to put my pressure about 25 psi. And when I spray these, if I get them about the right thickness, probably between 18 to 20 psi, maybe 15, it'll go down that low. We'll see how they come out in the mix anyway. So enough waffle, as I always do. I shall go and get ready. Now I'm not going to be spraying this in my spray booth because it's a pig to film in my spray booth. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put a sheet over my workbench. I will have the spray booth fan on to extract the fumes, but I'll put a sheet over the workbench and some newspaper, and I'll be spraying on there so I can film it for you. I will also be wearing my respirator. If you're spraying with an airbrush or a rattle, well, if you're spraying rattle cans, go outside and do it. Don't do it indoors. Everybody in the house will hate you and want to rip your lungs out and your face off and your kidneys through your nose. It's just horrible. It's toxic stuff and it smells. If you're airbrushing, just make sure you've got good ventilation. If you can have some kind of extractor fan, if you've got a spray booth, even better. Always wear a respirator, not a dust mask. The dust mask is for dust. A respirator is for paint fumes and aerosolized paint. If you just use a dust mask, you're still going to breathe the paint particles in. You're poisoning yourself. And people will say, oh, it's only acrylic, it's not toxic. Yeah, it's not toxic. But if I poured a litre of crystal clear spring water into my lungs, I'd die. So anything in your lungs is bad. So always a respirator. Anyway, I'll shut up now. I'll go and get everything ready, and we'll do some spraying. Okay, so the primer's now on. Yeah, look at that. Nice, isn't it? This stuff is lovely stuff. Now, I was having some issues with the airbrush, which is why that last section looked a little bit chaotic and wavy with the airbrush. So what I did was, once this first coat had dried after about an hour or so, I checked it over. There were some bits missing where I'd not got loads of primer and it was a bit, you know, exposed. So I went back and did a second coat. But before I did that, I put some tape in here and I assembled the turret. Now, this isn't glued in place. It's just sitting in there. But it's a nice tight enough fit that I don't need to worry about that. So I've got some tape in here, just Tamiya masking tape stuck on the inside. This is to keep the inside of the turret black, because we want that black later on, so that when we put the dude in here, or this guy in here, you're not going to see half his feet missing or the lower half of his legs missing. We're going to fade those into the black. So I want to keep the interior black. So that tape's just on there. When we finish, we can just push it in with a pair of tweezers and pull it out. It'll be no problem. Or I can pull it apart if I need to, because this isn't glued. So that's all done. I do love that primer. What's next? Next, we need to get on with the colours. Now, I was debating which way to colour these, and what I'm going to do first, I'm going to go in with the wolf grey first as the main overall colour, and then add the camouflage pattern of the darker steel grey. Now, you might be asking, is this going to cause problems because it's a light colour and it's a black primer? Yes, it might do. What I could have done is primed this a light colour and then gone and done some pre-shading in all the darker shadow areas that I want to be darker, and then gone over with this, and it would have covered better. But because I've done it all black, it may take a bit more paint to cover this. But what I'm going to be doing is building it up slowly in misty coats, because I don't want this just to turn into this colour and flat. I want to keep some of the shadowing and shading to suggest some depth. So if I do this in light mist coats, I can focus in some areas and not in others, and you'll get a tonal variation. Then I can go in with this colour. Now, the other reason I've done this all black, and I'm going with the light one first, is I was thinking about how I'm going to do chipping. And I was initially thinking of doing like chipping fluids, or you know, something like that. Paint it, say, the chipping colour, so like a dark grey or something, or a rust colour, then some hairspray or some chipping fluid, then go over with the paint and then chip them off. However, because I'm going to be doing two colours, it's going to be sitting for a while between coats, and if you leave it for too long, yeah, it's harder to chip the paint off. So I decided not to bother with that at all. I'll just manually brush paint the chipping later on. That's how we're going to do it. So I decided to go with this one first, because this will show the shading effect more than this one. This will just come out looking blue, and what I'll do is I'll build up the camouflage pattern with this colour, but this will be the primary base colour. So let's go and get this done. So I'll get everything set up again. This time we're going to go for my Neo-Free Water 3.5mm nozzle. So what we'll be doing is we're putting some thinner in the cup and then adding the paint, mixing it around and then spraying it on, and hopefully we'll get the right mix. Like I said before, if you're airbrushing paints, acrylic paints, or any paints really, the thickness you want is kind of like skimmed milk. Not really much thicker, not really much thinner, although you can mix it thinner for certain effects. But for this, we're just going to try and get it to the consistency of skimmed milk. So I'll go and get everything ready, and we'll get this done. And then when we've finished all this spraying, I can get rid of this sheet, and our white balance can go back to normal. Back in a moment. Okay, so with that airbrushing done, the base colour is now down, and as you can see, it looks pretty spanky. Now bear in mind, when you're seeing this on the telly now, the blues are a bit more exposed than they are in real life. They're a bit more muted than you're seeing them here, but you get the idea now. These lovely blue colours, the medium and the light blue aren't that much different in real life. I didn't paint under here because you're not going to see that, and it's going to get covered in mud and weathering anyway, so I'm not too fussed about the camouflage. The ethic or the thinking behind it is that they've maybe painted this quickly and hastily in the field. They've just got some rattle cans of paint and splatched it on, so it's faded around the edges, and of course they haven't done under there because they can't get under there with their rattle cans. So there you go, or whatever the 41st millennium version of rattle cans is. So what's next? Well, one other thing I need to point out, I forgot to mention this. I did put a small dot of Humbrol Maskell masking fluid on each of the wheel hubs, just a tiny blob, and that's just to keep these covered up so no paint goes on them. And the reason I want to do that is that when it comes to glue the wheels on, I don't want to be scraping paint off. So once this is all fully painted and weathered, we'll pull off the masking fluid here, and there'll be exposed plastic, and that's just the contact surface for the wheels to glue on, because you can't glue through paint, it needs bare plastic. So there we go. So that's that done. What's next? Well, we need to start with the detail painting and the weathering. Well, we kind of need to start with all the detail painting, but we need to do some chipping first. We're going to cover this in chipping. Now the reason I'm doing this first and then going on to paint all the details is there's no point in painting like wooden handles and metallic silver parts and helmets and things like that, and then doing chipping and covering all the bits of wood and leather and everything that's not painted metal in chipping. It's just, I'd have to be really careful. So it's easier now to get the chipping done now, and then we can paint all the details and then move on to weathering and the decals. So all we're going to do is we're going to use for this the sponge method. So I have in a pair of reverse grip tweezers, which means I can hold them like that and they stay grippy. I've got basically a scouring pad, a washing up scouring pad. I pulled a bit of sponge off, I've tousled it a bit with the tip of my finger so it's got a bit of a rough surface, and we're going to use the Vallejo Game Colour Gris Carbon Denso, or Heavy Charcoal, 72155. And all we're going to do is I'm going to get some of this paint, give it a good shake. I'm going to put some onto my little palette here. I'm not using my wet palette for this, just my palette. Doesn't really need a wet palette for this. And we're basically going to do dry brushing with this sponge. So I'm going to get the sponge, I'm going to dip it on, and then I'm just going to take most of that paint off the sponge, as you can see me doing there. So there's not much paint left on there at all. Make sure there's no little blobs of it hiding. And all we need to do is now basically go around our model and just very gently hit it with the sponge, just very lightly. Now you won't really see much coming off at first, in fact you may see almost nothing, but the idea is you're just imparting very tiny paint chips. In fact I've got almost nothing coming off there at all, but that's fine because you want to build this up slowly. So get some more paint on, there's probably not quite enough on there. So let's just get the majority of the paint off. Paint on the sponge. Let's try and find an edge. Let's do there. And to start with, you're just trying to find edges and corners. Okay, so you can see now after a little while, just building up some chipping with the sponge. It's looking nice and battered. Yes, I also went to town on the dozer blade here, but this is going to have some stuff built up on it, so this is a work in progress. So we've got these chips now, and you've got this one here, which is lovely. It looks like the paint's chipped off and been worn away by use or a bullet pinging off. Now it looks a bit extreme and a bit weird, but we're going to work more on it, and once we do all the weathering on top it will blend in a bit more, but for the moment we're going to do some extra bits. So what we've got next is we have the paint we used at the start, Wolf Grey 72047, put it in the middle of the screen dear. And what we're going to do, first of all we're going to use this colour, and we're going to use this colour over some of the chips on the darker blue areas. Let me find one that's a good one to start on, like this one here where there's the darker blue, because if we use this colour on the light blue areas of course it'll be the same colour. So we're going to do two colours. We're going to use this one first of all on the dark blue area. So I've got some on my wet palette. Let me get some water in the paint. I'm going to thin it a little bit with a little tiny bit of water, not too much, just a bit. Okay, so got some on the palette, got it thinned a little bit. Let's do on this one, let's do that one up there. So I've got my very fine 000 Winsor & Newton very fine brush. I'm going to get some paint on the brush, and again it's a little bit thinner than you normally do, but always thin it with some water. And what we want to do is we want to basically work around the edges very subtly, as subtle as we can. Got a bit too much paint on the brush there. Around these chips, just little tiny dots and marks, just to give a sort of 3D effect to them. Let's find another one. Let's find this one down here. Now logically with a paint chip, if you're doing it super realistically, you should paint this on the edge that would catch the light. So normally it would be the bottom edge, say down here, because this would catch the light. But we're going to be a bit creative and just get a kind of interesting look. So what I'm going to do is all the chips, there's more paint on my brush, all the chips that are on the dark blue area, I'm going to go around and highlight like this. Let's find another one, like these on here. There's not really much on there, but we've got some on the very top, on the very edge here. I'm going to highlight with this colour on the dark blue. Where I've got an area of light blue, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix in some white with this wolf grey and get an even lighter colour that's lighter than this light grey. And do exactly the same over the light grey areas. Let's find some more. So I'm going to go around and get all these done. Let me just get some more. Handy tip by the way, when you get paint on your brush, especially when you're using paints that are a bit thinner than normal, when you get it on your brush, just take some off on your thumb so you don't get an excess of paint. So I'll go around and get all these done. When we come back, we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so that outlining is now done. It's very subtle. You can see it in a few places. It's not dead evident. It's not like massively evident. You can't see it everywhere. Let me get a pointy stick. But you can see it on things like that there, or this edge here, which is just off shot. This edge here. You'll definitely see it on the back of the dozer blade. You can see like on these little chips here and around the edges and on this edge here. It's very subtle. It's just more there to be noticeable subconsciously. You can catch it with your eye. Got a bit there and all over these chips on that bit there. And what I did discover was, I said I was going to go in once I'd done that. Wow, talking rubbish. It's minus 400 degrees today, so if I get a little shaky hand and talking rubbish, it's because it's really cold. I've got like 12 pairs of pants, 4 pairs of socks, 13 sweaters and everything on, but my hands are still cold. You can't really wear gloves when you're painting. So yes, I said I was going to go in with the wolf grey and do that, and then go back in with the wolf grey and see what I mean? My hands are just frozen. It's really, really cold in the middle of Storm Agnes or Emma or whatever she's called. So wolf grey, yes, I was going to go in with a mix of this with some white added for like a second pass. I didn't need to. What I discovered was that the wolf grey by itself, on its own, was actually a little bit lighter than the base coat I'd applied. I'm going to point on that brush. Because this was applied over a black undercoat, or a black primer coat, it was a little darker than just the bare colour. So I could still apply it over here, and it still stood out a little tiny bit. It's very subtle, but it's there and you can see it. And the effect of that outlining is just to give it a three-dimensionality, so they're not just flat splattered on chips. It looks like the paint is peeling. Now, like I said before, when you're doing realistic chipping, like on here, what you do is you restrict, I've got shaky hands because it's cold, you restrict your chips to the lower parts of the chip as if the light is shining down on it. But I didn't want to go for too realistic because that's kind of boring. And this is a ridiculous model anyway. So like on this one here, we've put like highlights at the top. It doesn't matter. It just makes it more visually appealing. So what's next? Next, we want to do more chipping. More chipping. Yes, we want to do a bit more chipping. Now, if you remember, I'll just move this out of the way. If you remember, the idea of the chipping was to suggest that there's the blue paint on top and there's dark grey as like a primer coat underneath. We want to suggest in some places that the primer coat's been chipped away and underneath you've got bare metal that's been exposed to the elements. And if this was like a spaceship or something, we'd say it's space metal and just looks like metal. But this is Warhammer, where this tank could have been in the field for 100 years, 300 years. It's, you know, reproduced off a pattern that's thousands and thousands of years old. You have to kind of know the backstory. But this tank could have been in the field and operating for hundreds of years. So we're going to give it some battering. So we're going to use 70982, which is Cavalry Brown. Do it on camera, do. Cavalry Brown. And we're going to be super subtle with this. We're just going to do exactly the same as we did with the original chips. Well, apart from not using a sponge. So I've got some on my wet palette. I've got a little bit of water in it. Always thin your paint whenever you're brush painting. Add a little bit of water to the paint. And I've come down to the desk now because it's fiddly work and it's easier than holding it up. And all we're going to do is, not on every chip, but on some chips, we're just going to add little rusty chips. And we're going to try and roughly follow the shape of the chip. And you can do as much or as little as you like. So I might do just some of the bigger chips. Just here and there, just to give a suggestion of rust. So get some more paint. For this you will need a fine, very small, delicate detail brush. Now on this bit here, it's a chip on a corner. So what I'll do is I'll angle the brush at 45 degrees and I'll run it along the edge there. And that just gives a suggestion that the rust, that the paint's been chipped away to the primer. And then where the edge is exposed, it's a sharp, hard edge. If I could stop my hand shaking. That's got more damage later on, and that's been more likely to be exposed to rust. So it looks quite bright when it's wet, but as soon as that dries, it will tone down a bit. Because it's got the dark colour underneath, it'll tone down a little bit and blend in a bit more. So I'm just going to go around, and my hands are really shaking because of the cold. It's really cold. So I'm just going to go around, and I'm just going to restrict myself to some of the bigger chips. And put some little bits of rust in there. Now we'll obviously add rust and things later on, but this is just a starting point. And the thing to keep in mind is a lot of this work will disappear later on. Also, the thing to keep in mind is I can't actually see what I'm doing. Hooray! Okay, and that's those rusty bits done. You can see on the dozer blade there, it's looking a bit more interesting. Little bits here and there. So what's next? Well, next we're going to start some of the detail painting, and this is painting all the little bits and bobs that aren't just going to be the camouflage colour. So we're going to start with this exhaust part. Now I did some research because my brain says this should be rusty, and I did some research and found photographs of an AML-90 with a rusty exhaust. Perfect. So we're going to do this a rust colour. So for this we're going to use AMIG 043 MO by MIG's Shadow Rust to start with as a base colour, just to set it apart from the rust we've already put on there. So I'm going to get some on the brush. I've thinned it down with a little bit of water, and I'm going off my wet palette. As always, thin your paints a little bit, and we're just going to brush this on. Now it will take more than one coat, because as you can see this colour is a bit transparent. So we're just going to quite simply first of all brush over this. The reason you want to thin your paint a little bit, never brush paint straight from the pot or jar or bottle, because you want it to dry as smooth as possible. And if you do it straight from the pot, it's going to be lumpy bumpy. Now brush marks. So always try and do it with a little bit of water, or depending on the paint, thinner. These are water based, so always go for water. Okay, so that's now dried. Now, slight correction to what I said a moment ago. I did say, you have to do a couple of coats or more than one coat to get a nice even colour. After I'd done the first coat, and you can see it's quite patchy, I actually decided to leave it as just that one coat because I quite like the patchy look. It's just a bit rough, it's a bit natural and random, and there are just hints of the blue underneath, which is kind of suggesting where there's paint just clinging on to the surface that hasn't been pulled away or thrown off by the rust. So it's just got that kind of nice rusty look. So what's next? So yeah, just one coat. What's next? Next we're going to go back in with the Sponge of Doom. We're going to go back in with the Cavalry Brown, which is 70982, the Vallejo model colour. And we're going to do exactly the same as we did with the original chipping, but just on this exhaust pipe. So I'm going to get some on the sponge. I know you can't see it. And then what I'm going to do is just very carefully and very gently sponge on some of this. Now this is a lighter, brighter colour, so it's going to stand out against the darker brown. A bit more off, I think. Want a bit less on there. Get off, get off. See how I've got a more pointy sponge this time? So I'm going to get some on there. I'm going to turn it over. Now I know this will be out of focus for you, but this is so I can see what I'm doing. It's also off camera. So I can see what I'm doing, because I want to get some underneath. Just dab some on. All over. Okay, so now that's had a few minutes to dry. You can see it's looking a bit more patchy and varied. Time to go in with one last colour, and this is more sponge work. And to this, I've taken the Cavalry Brown and I've added some MIG, Ammo by MIG Yellow, AML-90 if you're going to lighten a colour and you don't want it to turn into a pastel shade, sometimes you can just add yellows, especially things like reds. It stops it going pink and makes it just brighter and lighter. So with browns, it just makes it more orangey, yellowy, rusty tone, which is exactly what I'm looking for. So I'm just getting some on the sponge now and taking most of it off. Right, so that's most of that off. Same again, just going to go in and just do some really sparse, a bit less this time, a bit more Spartan, a few spots here and there. It's not much brighter, but it's a little bit, and it just varies it. Okay, and that's the rust now done. Nice patchy looking. Now there's more to go on this, but that'll get to the stage later on. We're doing washes and filters and things like that. So what is next? Next, I'm going to do the things that need to be a kind of khaki colour. So things like rucksacks, we have straps on the barrels. Now I did some research with Ted and, nearly said Ted and Fox then. That's like when Ted said Chris, Ted and I on the stream last week. With Tony and Ted, and they were saying that in a lot of times when you get things like barrels and stuff on the back of vehicles, they're done with what are they called, like clamp ties, where you pull it tight and then you lock it down, and they're often canvas, so I'm going to do a kind of canvassy effect on those. What else do we have? Not there's anything else on there. On the turret we have the bed roll on the back to do. Apologies for my shoddy camera work, camera's in just the wrong place. So not many things, but I want to get the backpacks and things done. Oh, there's that thing there as well. I want to get the backpacks and things done first, because there's other things to paint on there, so I may as well get the base colour down for the backpack. So for that we're going to use heavy khaki 72149 from the Vallejo Game colour. It's the extra opaque. These got extra pigment, like they're kind of like Citadel base colours. They're a bit thicker and got more pigment to them. So I'm going to get some water on my brush. I've got some on the wet palette as always. Thin your paint a little bit and go in with more than one coat if you need to. Now for this I probably will need more than one coat, but we'll find out. So let's get this painted. Hopefully this is on camera. Yeah, you can see there, you can still see some of the paint showing through the blue, so I might need to do a second coat. We'll see how it goes. Get some more water because the paint's a little bit thick. Let's get going. Okay, so that's now been done. It did take 2 coats in the end. So you see we've got the rucksack there. I've just painted carelessly over all the other bits that are going to be different colours, because don't worry about those just now. Got the straps on the barrel at the back. I've not painted the clasps yet. Clasps. We have the whatever that is there, and on the top, on the turret, we have the little bedroll on the back. So they're just all painted. I've not painted the straps or clasps or anything, just literally got that base colour on. Took 2 coats to get a nice even colour. So what's next? Next, I want to paint the interior of, or the inside surfaces of these hatches. And I'm going to make this up completely, because obviously they shouldn't have the same camouflage colour scheme as the outside, because they wouldn't be open when they sprayed them. So we're going to paint these a different colour. Now if you've seen my Space Wolves at Storm Wolf build, you'll recognise this colour. Give it a good shake. It is Ammo by MIG US APC Interior Green AMIG-082. This is basically the colour I used on the inside of my Storm Wolf, because it's an Armoured Personnel Carrier Interior Green, so it's quite a good colour. So I'm giving it a good shake. I've not been showing you my wet palette, have I? No, I keep forgetting that. If you want to know how to make a wet palette, get yourself a shallow plastic tray of some sort. This is the lid for a sandwich box. Get some kitchen roll. Get a piece of parchment paper, kitchen cooking parchment paper, not greaseproof paper, not foil back paper, not tissue paper. Has to be parchment paper because it has to be ever so slightly permeable for the water. Soak it all in water, drain the water off. This paper is damp, the tissue is soaking in water, but it's just damp now. It allows a little bit of water through. When you use water-based paints like these, the Ammos or the game colours or the normal Vallejo colours or the Citadel colours, anything like that, then it keeps them moist for longer. They don't dry out. If you use a piece of paper or card or a tile or a glass bowl or sort of glass plate or something as your palette, they dry out really fast. They don't. They stay workable and moist. So I'm going to give it a jolly good shake. Going to see if I can get the lid off. Put some on the wet palette of wet palettes. Don't need a lot. We're going to add a small amount of water, and we're going to knock the camera. Got a small amount of water just to loosen it up a bit. Now these ammo paints are quite thin by themselves, so you don't need a lot of water. And they are fairly translucent, so you probably need 2 or 3 coats for this. And all I'm going to do is paint the inside of these hatch covers. Now you can see there it's quite thin. I'm going to take some of the excess off. It's quite thin and runny, so I've got to be careful. And to make sure I don't go over the edge, I'm just going to go up to the edge at about 45 degrees. Now I will need to paint the inside, the edge there, but not the outside, so I'll have to do that carefully. I'll do that when I'm not filming. So I'm just going to paint the flat surfaces here and these edges. The idea being that they're painted green at the factory. This stuff is typically zinc chromate, which is sprayed directly onto bare metal. So we're not going to do any black paint chipping on here, but we will do some chipping with a metallic colour. So on the interior there's no paint at all, there's just this zinc chromate coating. There we go. And then hatches are closed when they paint the vehicle. So the inside of the hatches stay green and the outside goes blue. So I'll get these done. Okay, while those little green bits are drying, let's go on and do the next bit. Next, I want to paint the wooden parts of the spade and the axe. I'm not going to paint this bit because I think that's probably more likely a metal rod, so I'm going to leave that one. But we have the handle here of the axe, which came with the kit, and the spade, which is a Warhammer spade. And it's just these 2 wood bits, so I don't need to go to town on these too much. And what we're going to use for this is somewhere, wherever I put it, there it is. We're going to use Ammo by Mig, Dunkelgelb aus 44, 1944 Dunkelgelb. Dunkelgelb, das ist richtig. No idea if it's the right shade of Dunkelgelb. Rivet counters can rejoice. It's probably the wrong colour. It's AMIG 011 Dunkelgelb. I like that word, Dunkelgelb. Ted can't say that. So dead simple. All we're going to do is we're going to first of all start the wood with some Dunkelgelb. So I'm going to get some on the brush. I've decided with these ammo paints, I'm not actually thinning them with water other than whatever water they pick up from the wet palette, because they are that thin. So this is fairly straightforward, this bit. Just going to focus on the wood parts. And like with the rust, I don't mind if this is a bit patchy and not particularly bold, because I want to suggest variation in the colour. Okay, so that's now dried, so on to the next step. Go back to the wet palette. We're going to go back to our, what was this? The Shadow Rust, the Ammo by Mig colour. Now this has been sat overnight. This is why I like using wet palette. This has been sat overnight. Colours have separated out a bit, so I've just stirred them around a little bit and they've kind of come back together. They're also a little bit thinner than they were before. So using a wet palette means you can keep colours lying around for ages. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get some of this Shadow Rust. I'm going to over thin it quite a lot. So you can see now it's really thin. It's more like a glaze. And all we're going to do is take the excess off. get some of that on the brush, and all we're going to do is just kind of dot it on these wooden parts, just like this. And what it will do, we'll get it on there initially, and it tends to just stick around the centre and not the edges. So we're going to get the excess off the brush, and now we're just going to munge that around with the brush and just blend it around the edges. It's kind of like a glaze almost, but not quite. Do the same on the other side. Get the excess off. Do the same here. A bit more, I think. There we go. That's that on there. Notice how it doesn't go down the sides, but that's when you munge it around with you take the paint off the brush and just munge it around with the dry brush, and it blends it and moves it around. Try and be careful not to get it on the blue bits. Okay, so that adds some little patterning there, and what I'll do is I'll probably do that 2 or 3 times and go over with more and more coats, just give it a couple of minutes to dry, and it hopefully should build up a nice kind of woody colour. So I'll go and get those done and we'll come back in a moment. Right, that's now dried. Did about 3 applications of that, just very lightly, and you can see it's now got a sort of nuanced patchy colour. It kind of looks like a twiglet, and now I really want some twiglets. So that's that. Now this is by no means the end of it. There's lots more we're going to do to darken this down, but that'll be later on when we start doing filters and shading and things like that. In terms of base colours, that's good enough. That's where I want to be. So what's next? Next we want to do the shiny metallics. For things like the axe head, the blade on the shovel. We've got clasps on here, but we're not. We will do those now. We've got to do some work on the doze blade and other bits and bobs around the whole vehicle. So for this, we're going to start with Ammo by Meg 045 gunmetal. Now some of these are going to be bright silvers, but we're going to start with a darker colour because we'll brighten it up later. So sometimes traditionally what you do is you do a light colour, like a light metallic colour, and then darken it with washes. We're just going to start with the darker colour. So all I'm going to do, I've got some of the gunmetal on my wet palette, as always. Again, these MIG paints are thin enough that you don't really need to add water to some of them, especially the metallics. And we're just going to paint over the base metallic colours. So we'll get these done. Now it's not all going to be brush painting. Some of it will be sponging. Okay, so those metallics have been done. We've got some on the dozer blade here on the front and back. We've got some on the gun that's on the pack on the side. I've done the caps of the fuel jerry cans. Not done the clasps yet, but we'll get round to those. What else? We've got some of the pistons here. On the top we've got the aerials on the Vox aerial, and we've got the gun on the front, and that's about it. Next step, more metallics. We're going to go with a different colour this time. This time we're going to use AMIG 191 steel. Now, I've kind of written this over as polished metal because I was supposed to get polished metal in a set of paints, and it was this one. So I don't actually know if this is polished metal or steel. I'm not quite sure. It's supposed to be steel, and I think it's steel, but we'll find out. Anyway, this is dry brushing time. Mostly on the dozer blade, because we want to give the effect that the paint has worn away. Now we've got the chips here obviously, but we want to get this kind of faded metal dozer blade effect, because this is it's going to be ploughing into rubble and debris and dead dudes and shifting stuff out of the way. So what we're going to do, we've got some of the steel on the palette, not the wet palette, just a normal palette. We've got 2 dry brushes, a tiny one and a big one, and all we're going to do is we're going to get a tiny amount of paint on the brush, on the big dry brush, just a little bit. We're going to get most of it off on a piece of tissue. To quote Duncan, because there's no other way to say this, we're going to work it amongst the bristles. Sorry, Duncan. Okay, don't need much on the brush at all. And then we're just going to go over this. Now this should be a lighter colour than the gunmetal for a start. So we can start by just doing normal drags like that and scrapes, just to pick out the edges here. What we can also start to do, as the paint wears off the brush, we'll do that bit first. We'll go over the edges Now a lot of this again will be lost once we actually start doing all the weathering, so it's no biggie. But we'll do all the edges first. Just get it to pick that up to give it some scuffy, scrapey effect. You can see there you've got kind of scuffs and scrapes. It's a good advantage of using a really rough brush like this. And then, now a lot of the paint has worn off, what we can start to do is very gently, almost no pressure, in circular motions, just start to work on the dozer blade. And just start to slowly build up a bit of a metallic sheen here. Now I'm going to focus more on the bottom of the dozer blade, because this is where the majority of your scuffing and scraping would happen. And it might take a while, because you've got almost no paint on the brush. Ooh, and I keep knocking the camera. So I'm just going to very slowly build up this metallic. So I'll crack on. It's going to take me a while to do this, because I'll probably have to reload the brush a few times. I'll crack on, and when I come back I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so you can see now the kind of effect I was going for. A kind of faded sheen. Now we need to do one more thing to this metallic to make it look like it's been battered with wow, that was a sentence failure, wasn't it? Debris and rubble. I tried to say debris and rubble at the same time without planning which one was going to come first. But you can see on the gun, on the turret, what was a dark sort of gunmetal colour has been dry brushed and is now a lot brighter. There's still more to do with this, and it will fade again once you do some dark washes. But it just gives you a bit of a, you can see inside the little holes here, that's what the original colour was. So it just brightens things up. Metallic dry brushes did the same on the spade as well. And it just gives it smooths out the grainy texture of the gunmetal and makes things look a bit cool. So what's left? Well, we need to put some chipping, more chipping on here. And for this, we're going to use that piece of sponge. Whoops, ping. And we're going to use some really small bits of chips. So I've still got the paint off to one. Oh, I'll get some more paint because it's gone dry. Give it a shake, give it a shake, mix the paint up. So we're going to use the ammo steel or polished metal, whichever one it is. Again, tiny amount on my palette. Got my little bit of sponge. I'll put the palette up here so you can see it. Little bit of sponge. I'm going to dip the sponge in. Then I'm going to get most of that off on the palette eventually. Can take a while. It's kind of a pot look as to what kind of shape sponge you get. It's the beauty of it being random, but it also means sometimes it can go a bit weird. Okay, and then all we're going to do is we're going to just focus on the edges, and we're just going to start doing some dots of chips. Now hopefully these will stand out against the dry brushed background. Hopefully. Doesn't always work. We'll do some here and there. Yeah, it's not really standing out. Well, that's fine. It's worth trying now, because what will happen is we're going to weather this and put different sort of washes and things and dirt and dust on it. So we'll have to. Oh, you can see there. You can see there a little bit of the flakiness. That's not too bad. If we focus it around some of the places we've put chips before, it helps make them stand out a bit. Put some there. So it kind of just catches the light. So there you go. That's cool. That's cool. Yes, a lot of this will just fade into a grey colour once we start doing weathering and washes. And that's fine, because we'll have to revisit it with the metallics again and do more dry brushing later on towards the end, just to get the bright bling that you can see on these edges here back, because that will all go. But it's just a way of building up the colours, building up the textures and the shading. So now you can see the blue paint is kind of faded to just these two patches. But you've still got a hint of the chips underneath, because this takes a lot. This takes a lot of battering, so it's likely it wouldn't have much paint left on it, and that's what we want to do. So, oh, you can see on the gun on the side there as well. It's looking much shinier now. So that's that done. What's the next colour? Next colour is... do we have a next colour? It's not actually going to be a lot of colours on this. We'll need to colour in the big flashlight or the big searchlight on the turret, but we're going to leave that till we've done the weathering, because that's not going to be dirty. We've got to start putting some shade in places. We've got to obviously start working on the back. Oh, I've got to colour these things in. I've got to do those. Let me choose a colour for these water bottles or whatever they are. And then I think once they're done, there's nothing else we really need to colour in, because it's actually quite a limited colour palette on this vehicle. So, oh yeah, there's one more colour. So anyway, let me go and choose a colour for these water bottles. And there's one more colour after that. And then I think we're done for this episode, because it's just getting the basic colours down. Back in a moment. Now, which colour? Okay, so I've chosen a colour for these, what I'm assuming are like bottles or water bottles. We're going to use MIG, Ammo by MIG, AMIG-077, dull green. It's the accountant of the green world. So I've got some dull green on my wet palette of wet palettes. Again, these are nice thin colours, so you don't actually need to thin them with water. They just get enough water off the palette. And now there are little metal handles and clasps and things on those, but I'll paint those in later. And as you can see, I think you'll see here, it's a really quite a transparent colour, so this may take a few coats, probably more than one, but less than 3. Okay, so that's those just painted and just drying now. One more colour to do, and for the one more colour we're going to go back to our game colour, Vallejo game colour 72155, the heavy charcoal, which we've used before. I want to use this one for the springs for the shock absorbers there, and also for this bit of the Vox unit here, this bit that looks like a rubbery thing. I'm going to use it as a kind of rubbery colour, a bit like Tamiya rubber black, so it's not quite black, so I can add dark washes to it and I can put dry brushing of lighter colours over it, but it's a dark grey colour. And all we're going to do is put that on those parts, because we're going to do other stuff to these shocks, and we're going to put oil and sort of stuff on there as well. Now, I haven't painted this bit either, the pattern on here. I might need to do that because it's so small. I'll probably have to do that off camera, and I'll just tell you what colours I've used, because it's really small. I need to get in there with a really fine brush, and I might leave that till, well, I don't know, I might do it now, I might leave it till later, but I'm not sure. So again, I've got some heavy charcoal on my palette. Now this is the game colour, so it's actually thicker than the ammo colour, so I do need to add a little bit of water to it. Get a bit of water on there, get the excess off on my hand, and we'll just paint in to shock absorbers, just the springy part. I don't know why I'm painting this dark colour, I just think it looks kind of cool. Now it is a little bit watered down, so it kind of mostly goes into the recesses, but that's cool. That works for me, so I'm happy with that. So I'm just going to go around and paint all these. Can't see them, they're too far away. It's just to make them stand out. And then once I've done those, I also need to do this bit. So I'm going to do that bit, I'm going to do this as well. Just this rubbery thing here, which I'll assume is like a kind of stretchable rubber kind of sleeve that goes around the antenna housing. So I'll do all this. So I'll get all this lot painted, and I think we're about done with the base colours. I think. I'll double check and make sure there's nothing else I need to do. And with a little bit of fast forwarding, base coats are done. Yes. Now I did go ahead and do the few little bits that I couldn't do on camera because they were too small. So this plate on the front door here, on the side door even, not the front door dear, it's not a house, which I'm reliably informed by one of my lovely followers is from a Dreadnought. This was just finished off in the ammo steel, the heavy charcoal, and a kind of mix of the khaki and some brown, just to give this tan colour. Now this will end up being like a sort of light coloured parchment, but at this stage we're just keeping it this colour because we're going to darken it with shades and, you know, washes and things like that, and then build up the layers on top. The knapsack, I finished off the metal parts in the steel again, added some blue to the casing on the gun, which is the Vallejo game colour 72102, the steel grey. That going forward should be, theoretically should be, the colour for the armour on the dues, because it should match the colour on the casing of the gun. However, in all likelihood, I'll probably forget that, and we'll just have a different colour completely, but never mind. And the butt of the gun, the grip, the hand grip, is just coloured in the heavy charcoal again. I also added all the little clasps to the package, the bed rolls and things like that on the sides. What else did I do? I think that was it really, apart from obviously, you know, glue the wheels on, which you can obviously tell without me telling you that. But that just about now finishes that does complete the base coats. Now what's going to happen now is that there's lots of weathering that needs to go on here. and we're going to do things like pin washes, we'll do a filter, we'll probably do some traditional washes like you would with, say, a Citadel shade, or I've got myself, where are they? I've got myself a couple of things. I've got the game colour, game ink black, and which is 72094, and I have the game colour wash, which is sepia shade. This is going to be like Agrax's shade, this is going to be like Null Noil, because we're not using the Citadel colours. Oh, one thing I did need to do, I did do the sort of the rounds in the ammo case here. You can see I did need to cheat a little bit and use the Citadel colour. I had to use Balthazar gold for these because I didn't have a kind of bronzy coppery colour, so they've gone on, and the green in the middle is just dull green again for the canvas strip that the shells go in. But yes, these are all flat colours now for most of it. They look a bit rubbish because they're all flat. Once the sort of washes and shades and pin washes and things like that go over the top, we'll start to build up some depth. Once we've got the depth in there with the shade layers or the wash layers, whatever you want to call them, we will then start bringing in some of the things. We'll start layering. We'll bring back the highlights like on the rucksacks and the bedrolls and the sort of the hatches here and things like that. We'll start to bring back the lighter colours again to brighten the back up. And then there's lots of weathering to do. But that finishes the base coats, so that's where we are going to leave it for here. This is where I want to be, and there's all the basic colours on. I'm not 100% sure what the next step will be, because I need to mix and match a bit. I'm going to do some washes, like I say, which I can do directly over the paint, but I also want to do some pin washes and filters and things which needs to be over gloss varnishes or matte varnishes and different things. I've got to think ahead now and plan exactly what I want to do, so stay tuned for the next episode when I'll have figured that out. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching. As always, this has been filmed for my good friends and sponsors over at emodels.co.uk. In my opinion, the UK's leading online retailer for models and model supplies. Do go and check them out. They've got a massive selection of kits, tools, books, paints, everything you'll ever need. We always say if they haven't got it, you don't need it. There's always the slim chance that occasionally you might go in and not be able to find a specific thing, but if that is the case, it either means it's just out of stock temporarily, or maybe it's just something they don't stock, but they can probably get it for you. So if you ever can't find something, drop them an email. They'll either be able to let you know when it's back in stock, or they'll be able to get one for you most likely anyway. So just give them a shout and check them out. Don't forget, of course, their Facebook page as well, facebook.com/emodels_ltd. Brilliant little group. You can hang out, show off your stuff to other people, get loads of feedback, and also you'll be kept up to date with the latest offers and when things are coming into stock and things like that. So do go and hang out there. And last of all, don't forget, of course, Monday nights, 9 PM, me, Ted, Chris and Foxx. It's a joke from last week, never mind. Me, Ted, Chris and Foxx do the eModels live stream over on the eModels YouTube channel. You can also watch it on the eModels website, emodels.co.uk/live. It's basically a couple of hours of me, Ted and Chris hanging out, shooting the breeze, talking models, answering your questions in chat. We basically spend a couple of hours interacting with everybody in the live chat, answering questions, trying to avoid some questions but having to answer them anyway, just hanging out and being a bit silly. Most of the time we talk about food in the 1980s and 1970s when we were kids, so come and join in, come and watch. It's always good fun. Like I say, you can watch it on the YouTube channel, or which you're watching this on now, unless you're watching this on my channel, or you can watch it on the eModels site, emodels.co.uk/live. Anyway, enough waffle from me. I need to go and figure out what the heck I'm doing with this. I'm not sure yet, but until next time, do take care of yourselves. Go make something awesome. Go be awesome. Don't want to point at that, I should point at you. Go be awesome. Got paint on me hand, look. Downside of brush painting, you just... Adios amoebas.